Okay, so this video is for AP Bio, topic 712, variation in populations. And if you've been following along in my Unit 7 playlist, or you've been learning about natural selection in your AP Bio class, this is kind of like redundant and a bit of a summary of what you've already learned in previous topics. But let's go ahead and talk about it anyway. So here, the essential knowledge or the enduring understanding for this topic is that the level of variation in a population affects its population dynamics. Well, if your teacher is following along Unit 7, Unit 8 is where we talk about ecology and populations. And so a population is a group of the same species. And when we talk about population dynamics, that's the portion of ecology that deals with the variation in time and space of the population size and density. So if we think about a population and how many individuals exist within it, the variation of that population impacts that. And so basically, if we look at this little image of natural selection, for example, the variation within this beetle population is going to impact how easy or difficult it is for predators to find them, and therefore have an impact on the population dynamics, the size and survival of that population in that ecosystem. Anyway, let's go ahead and look at an example of the California's condors, the condor population in the West Coast, California, Arizona, Utah. Condors are very large birds, and if we look at them as a learning example, basically, condors were very numerous, hundreds of years ago across the southwest of the U.S., and they had a large variety of genes, so their gene pool was very varied. However, in the last couple hundred years, their population began to decline, some of it due to human activities, one of them mainly being that the human hunters would shoot animals and the carcasses left behind contained lead bullets. Well, then the condors ended up with lead poisoning and their population was decimated. At one point, there was just 27 individuals left in the wild at all. So you can imagine, as we kind of saw in this animation, as their population size declined, the amount of variation remaining in their gene pool also declined. And so therefore, this population would have a very difficult time surviving on its own and was on the verge of extinction. However, so here, species and populations with little genetic diversity are at risk for extinction. And so with very few alleles remaining, that means that there's less variety or less phenotypes to be able to survive changing environmental conditions. So humans in the 1990s then took what they could find, right, males and female pairs, and started a captive breeding program. And luckily today we've increased the number of California condors up to over 500. I think there's something like 550 out in the wilds now. But if you start, it's just kind of like tying into population genetics with a bottleneck effect. So this condor population, this species, underwent a severe bottleneck effect, and just the few remaining individuals are the ones who are now being bred. And so with that, there's going to be limited variation in their gene pool, even though the population size is increasing. Now, this is important to note, though, is that, oh, look at the bird, is that a genetically diverse population makes them more resilient to environmental, this says perturbations, to disturbances and challenges. And so therefore, if a population has a greater genetic variety, therefore there's more alleles, more phenotypes in that population, they are better able to withstand changes in their environment. And so this population with more variation would be more resilient compared to the previous one of all homozygous recessive individuals. Obviously, I'm talking about a single trait here, but you can imagine an individual is going to have multiple different alleles for all different kinds of traits, right? So the more variation, the better for the species to survive. Now let's go ahead and look at one more example. So here we're going to talk about the example of the peppered moth. So this is copied from a different PowerPoint of mine and so on video. So now I'm just going to add it in to this context. So here, alleles, we want to make a point that alleles that are adaptive in one environmental condition, so adaptive means they aid in the survival and reproduction of that individual, helps them survive and reproduce. If they're helpful in one environment, they may be like harmful in another because of different selective pressures. So when we look at the 1800s in England with the peppered moths and the Industrial Revolution, initially the peppered phenotype is going to have the high fitness. Now the dark phenotype could survive if the moth happened to land near like a knothole on the tree, but generally speaking, the peppered moth is way more camouflaged and harder for birds to find compared to the dark phenotype. So in the like original habitat, you have these birch trees, and the peppered, look at all these moths that are on these trees. However, they were very well camouflaged, very difficult for a predator to like see them and pick them off. So in this example, the peppered phenotype, that allele has a high fitness. Another way we can phrase this is that it has an adaptive advantage. It has an advantage at surviving over the darker phenotype. However, during the Industrial Revolution, you had a lot of the factories starting to produce soot and ash, and it darkened the trees. Not only did the like pollution land on the trees and darken them, but it also ended up killing the lichens that were growing on the trees that also helped with camouflaging the peppered phenotype. So what we see here is that there's new selective pressures. Now that dark allele is conferring an advantage at survival compared to the peppered moth or the peppered phenotype. And so there's new selective pressures. And therefore, when one allele was advantageous initially, is no longer offering an advantage at surviving and reproducing. So we can tie this to natural selection, that natural selection is always happening, but which traits or which alleles are beneficial is dependent on the context of the environment and those selective pressures. So initially, the peppered phenotype or the peppered allele conferred or gave high fitness. And then in the new environment, though, with different selective pressures, it then had low fitness. So alleles that are adaptive in one environmental condition may be deleterious in another because of different selective pressures. All right, that rounds out 7-12, and I feel like it was just emphasizing things that you've already learned in this unit, but great job for following through, and good luck on any test you're studying for.